I hadn't seen my father, General Marcus Thorne, in almost 3 years. And the first thing he did when I walked into his office was look at me the way you might look at a crack in the foundation of the family mansion. The office at Thorne Dynamics headquarters smelled of polished mahogany, the ozone of machinery, and power. Thick, almost tangible. My brother, Julian, was already seated in the chair across from my father's desk, his legs crossed, his expression smug, like a man who had just closed a multi-million-dollar deal without leaving his couch. He was dressed in an immaculate Zegna suit. I was wearing a simple black turtleneck and tactical pants. The contrast was deliberate. On my part, Mr. Hensley, the family lawyer, nodded at me, guardedly, almost sympathetically. He had worked with our family since my mother was alive, and the house still felt like a home and not a branch of the Pentagon. No one said hello. No hugs. No routine questions about my last deployment to an unfriendly country whose name they wouldn't even bother to remember. But that wasn't why I was here. I was here because I'd promised my mother. That was the only reason. Hensley cleared his throat, opened a tooled leather folder, and began to read the will. His voice was flat, like a newscaster reading a casualty report. The bulk of the assets, the Potomac property, the art collection, all went to my father. That was to be expected. A block of Thorne Dynamics stock, enough to give him control of the board, went to Julian. My brother smiled faintly, adjusting his already perfect tie. He was probably already mentally rearranging the furniture in my father's office. Hensley turned the page. His face didn't move. And finally, he said, pausing just a little, a handwritten codicil, notarized a week before my death. A codicil. My father tensed. Julian stopped smiling. To my daughter, Barbara, Hensley read to his mother, my only true ally, I leave complete and sole control of the Thorne Charitable Trust, including all its assets, accounts, and operational management. I know that only she can fulfill my true desire, to ensure that this trust serves not a reputation, but people, for those who were broken and forgotten by the system. A silence fell over the room, thick as gun grease. The foundation. It wasn't just a bag of money. It was the Thorne family showcase, their socially responsible face, an instrument of influence through which tens of millions of dollars flowed each year for veteran support and patriotic initiatives. In reality, it was a reputational laundry, and I always suspected more than that. My father's face went stony. Julian rose slowly, his complacency cracking to reveal naked, cold fury. Is this some kind of joke? He hissed. She was out of her mind when she wrote that. You know that, father. General Thorne remained silent, his eyes fixed on the document in Hensley's hands. It was tacit consent. The lawyer, his expression impassive, produced a thin sheet of paper covered in my mother's familiar, elegant handwriting. The original codicil. He laid it on the table. This document is legally binding, he stated. Before I could even draw a breath, Julian took a step forward. He snatched the paper as if it were laced with poison. Here is your codicil, he spat, looking straight at me. And right there, in front of the lawyer, in front of my father, who made no move to stop him, my brother crumpled the precious sheet of paper and shoved it into the office shredder next to the desk. The machine whined in displeasure, and in a matter of seconds had shredded my mother's last will and testament into narrow, useless strips of paper confetti. Hensley gasped. My father leaned back in his chair, a look of grim satisfaction crossing his face. This was not just an act of destroying a document. It was an act of erasing me. Again. This is what you get, Julian said, dusting off his hands, for always going against the family. I didn't flinch. I didn't scream. I just smiled. Not a happy smile, but the kind you put on when you know for sure that you have not just one card up your sleeve, but a whole deck of cards. The one I trained in interrogation rooms, where silence speaks louder than screams. Because what he had destroyed was not what it seemed. He had not seen the second object, the one Hensley had slipped me, along with the copy of the will, as I walked in. Small, heavy, wrapped in velvet. Your mother asked me to give this to you personally, he had whispered. And she said, use it when they think they've won. They had. So it was time. I sat still while Julian and my father discussed how to fix the situation. Their voices merged into a monotonous hum of smugness and contempt. Julian was already talking about immediately challenging Mother's insanity at the time the codicil was drawn up. My father was nodding, arguing that the trust should remain under stable and predictable management. Under his management. They didn't even look in my direction, as if I were a piece of furniture that would soon be removed. I had given them that illusion. Let them revel in their small victory. In my trouser pocket was the velvet pouch. My fingers automatically felt its cool, smooth surface. Not paper inside. Something far more durable. I stood up without saying a word. No dramatic speech, no threats. I just stood up and walked toward the door. Is that all? Julian called after me. Are you going to run away like you always do? I turned at the door. My smile must have seemed strange to them, out of place. I'm not running away, Julian, I said quietly. I'm just giving you the rope. What you do with it is up to you. I left without waiting for an answer, closing the mahogany door firmly behind me. Hensley was waiting for me in the hallway. His expression was a mixture of professional disapproval and human sympathy. Barbara, he began, I have to tell you that what they're doing is illegal. We're not going to do anything, Mr. Hensley, I interrupted. Not yet. He looked at me surprised. Mom knew this would happen, I added. She thought of everything. The drive to my small rented apartment in Arlington was silent. I didn't turn on music or listen to the news. Just the steady hum of the engine and my heartbeat, steady and calm as a metronome. This calm was something I developed over the years. In war zones, panic is your worst enemy. It clouds your judgment, makes you make mistakes. And I couldn't afford to make mistakes. Not then, not now. At home, I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window. The city went about its business, unaware of the small war that had just been declared in one of Washington's most powerful families. The weight of everything that had happened began to settle on my shoulders. Not the bitterness of betrayal, I was used to that, but the weight of responsibility. I remembered the last conversation I had had with my mother. It had been in the hospital, 2 weeks before she passed away. She was weak, but her mind was as sharp as a scalpel. She asked everyone to leave. When we were alone, she took my hand in hers, which had become almost transparent, and looked into my eyes. They're going to try to take it all, Bobby, she whispered, using my childhood nickname. Not because they want the money, because they can't stand what they can't control. And they can't control you. She squeezed my hand tighter. I started this fund for other purposes. Your father turned it into a monument to himself. I want you to give him his soul back. Help the people he despises. The discarded, the broken, the inconvenient. People like you. She smiled weakly. People like me. Then she handed me a small, heavy object wrapped in a handkerchief. It's a key. Not a physical one. It will open something that cannot be burned or torn. Everything you need is in there. But use it only after they show their true colors. They must fire the first shot. I thought she was being dramatic, but I took it. They will try to erase more than just my will, Barbara, she said as we parted. They will try to erase you. And so they did. I pulled a velvet pouch from my pocket. Inside was a small USB drive, shaped like an antique key, made of dark metal. Not a flash drive from an electronics store, but something custom-made. Expensive, reliable. Like everything my mother made. I went to my desk, pulled out my secure laptop, an old habit I had never broken, and inserted the key into the USB port. No password prompts. A single folder appeared on the screen, labeled Insurance. Dozens of files inside. Scans of documents, bank statements, encrypted audio recordings. And one video file, titled, If You're Watching This, Bobby. I clicked on it. My mother's face filled the screen. She was sitting in her favorite chair in the garden, looking tired but determined. Hello, honey, she said, and her voice was full of the warmth I sorely needed. If you're watching this, then Marcus and Julian have done exactly what I was afraid of. They've chosen a facade over a family. She paused as if collecting her thoughts. The shredder, the fire, the lawyer's tricks, those are their methods. My method is here. This flash drive is not just a copy. It's the original. All the Foundation's documents, all the assets, have been transferred to a new, digital trust registered in Switzerland. What they destroyed was just a paper shell. The real inheritance is here. And it's yours. Legally impeccable. I exhaled. The relief was almost physical. But Mom wasn't done yet. But this is just the beginning, Bobby. Money is a tool. They're not going to try to take away your money. They're going to try to take away your voice. They're going to hit you where it matters most.
Your job.
Your name. Be prepared. They've already started. At that moment, an email alert popped up on my personal phone. Subject: Notice of temporary suspension of access to state secrets. My heart skipped a beat. Mom was right. They had already started. I stared at the laptop screen, where my mother's face was still visible, and at the phone screen, where it is written in black and white that my career, my life for the past 15 years, was on hold. Security clearance suspended. In our world, that was a death sentence. It meant that someone, and I knew exactly who, had set in motion the process that would transform me from a national security asset into a threat. I opened the email. The dry, official language announced that I was being investigated due to information that casts doubt on my credibility. No details. No specific accusations. Just a stigma. I closed the laptop. The calm I had cultivated for so long was beginning to crack. It was a low blow. My father, General Marcus Thorne, the man who signed the clearance orders himself, knew exactly what that meant. It wasn't just bureaucracy. It was a stigma that was nearly impossible to wash away. Even if you are acquitted, the scar remains. You become the one who is tested. A toxic asset. The first thing I did was go to the bank. Not any regular bank, but the one with the safe deposit box address listed in one of the files on my mother's key. It was a small, unremarkable private bank in Georgetown, the kind that valued privacy over profit. The file listed a box number and a code word, Cassandra. The name my mother had given to her favorite rose in the garden. The name of a prophet no one believed. Just like her. The manager, an older man in a perfectly tailored suit, showed me into the vault. The silence was absolute, broken only by the click of the lock. The box was small. Inside was a thin black leather folder and a single object, a small tape recorder. I opened the folder. Inside were printouts of offshore accounts, charts of funds moving from the Thorns charity to shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands, and from there to lobbying firms. My mother had been collecting evidence for years. She documented how her husband and son turned her brainchild into a money laundering and political influence buying machine. They weren't just supporting veterans, they were buying contracts for Thorn Dynamics with money that was supposed to go toward prosthetics and rehabilitation. The thought made me sick to my stomach. This wasn't just stealing. This was betraying everything my father believed in and prided himself on in public. He had built his reputation on the bones of those he claimed to protect. I grabbed the folder and the recorder. A fine, cold rain was falling outside. I got into the car and sat for a few minutes, watching the rain run down the windshield. I had everything I needed to destroy them now. But I was also incredibly vulnerable. They were attacking me where it hurt most. My service, my honor as an officer, it was the only thing I felt truly mine, something I had earned myself, away from their dirty money and hollow words. And now they were trying to take that away, too. I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed someone who spoke the law but understood the language of war. And I knew just the person. Anya Sharma. The lawyer they called Valkyrie in the halls of the Pentagon. A former military lawyer, she left the army after refusing to hush up a high-level corruption case. Now she had her own small practice and she took on only the most hopeless cases, veterans who were being eaten up by the system. Her office was in an old building above a laundromat, and it smelled of strong coffee and justice. Anya greeted me in jeans and a faded t-shirt that read, "I speak for the voiceless." She listened to me in silence, looking over the paperwork I had brought. Her face grew darker. "Classic," she said when I was done. "A patriarch who's afraid of losing control. They don't just want to steal from you, Barbara. They want to erase you, turn you into a crazy, resentful daughter with PTSD, so that no one will ever believe a word you say." She stood up and walked to the window. Initiating a security clearance is a powerful move. Dirty, but powerful. They know it will tie your hands and discredit you in the eyes of any judge or committee. What can we do? I asked. My voice sounded hollow, like it wasn't mine. Anya turned around. There was a fire in her eyes. They're playing chess, thinking you'll move the pawns. We'll knock over the board. We'll strike not at their accusations, but at their foundation. We'll prove that checking your clearance isn't a matter of national security, but an attempt to cover up a criminal offense. And we'll do it loudly. She picked up the phone from the table. But for that, we'll need help. You need someone who can follow the digital trail of this anonymous tip all the way to the White House, if necessary. Do you have such people? I nodded. There was one. Cypher. My former partner in cyber intelligence. A genius who could hack anything from a smartwatch to a satellite. After he was fired, he'd gone into hiding, but I knew where to find him. Okay, Anya said. Contact him. We need to know who pressed the button. In the meantime, I'll prepare the lawsuit. Not about the inheritance. Of defamation and malicious prosecution. We will force them to defend themselves where they least expect it. As I walked out of her office, I felt the fear give way to cold, clear anger. The war had begun, and I was on my own turf. That evening, as I drove past my house, I noticed a nondescript sedan parked across the street. There was a man inside. I couldn't see his face, but I recognized the car. It was the same one my father's security team used. They were watching me. The game was on in earnest. The parked sedan wasn't just an observation, it was a message. A silent, arrogant reminder that their resources were limitless and my world was a fishbowl they could peer into at any time. I didn't bother to acknowledge them. I pulled into my parking spot and got out with a bag of groceries, like a normal person returning home after a normal day. But every muscle in my body was tense. I hadn't turned on the lights in my apartment. I went to the window, crouched behind the curtain. The car was still there. This wasn't the work of amateurs. They knew how to conduct surveillance, stay out of sight, change positions, work in shifts. My father, a general, had used his old army connections. He treated me not like a daughter, but like an enemy agent. Well, that was his mistake. He had taught me the rules of this game, and I knew how to play it to win. The first order of business was to contact Cypher. Normal channels of communication were out of the question. My phones and computers were likely already tapped. I dug out an old, clean laptop and a burner phone from a hiding place in the bookcase. They were relics of my past life, tools I hoped I'd never need again. I left the house through the back door and walked a few blocks, constantly changing directions to throw off any tales I might have. Once I was sure I was alone, I went into a 24-hour coffee shop, connected to public Wi-Fi via VPN, and sent an encrypted message to an old address known only to the two of us. The message was short. Cassandra is in trouble. Need a shadow theater audit.
Urgent.
Shadow theater was our old code for dirty games within government structures. The answer came 7 minutes later.
Copy.
Drop point coordinate sent. I'll be ready in 24 hours. Cypher was in business. The next step was to listen to the recorder my mother had left behind. I returned to the apartment, making sure that the watchers had changed and that the new post had not yet taken up position. I turned on the white noise machine to drown out any bugs, put on my headphones, and pressed play. My mother's voice was quiet, a little shaky, but clear. She had been recording her conversations with my father for the past year. These were not arguments, not screams. These were quiet, chilling conversations over dinner or in the car. Marcus, the fund's accounts are again being questioned by the auditors, she would say. Honey, it's just bureaucracy. Everything is under control, he would reply in his condescending tone. Under whose control? This money is supposed to go to a rehabilitation center at Walter Reed, but it goes to a consulting firm called Aegis Strategy. Who is that? She insisted. You don't need to bother your pretty little head with such things. Aegis helps us with lobbying on Capitol Hill for veterans. The lie was so smooth, so polished. But the last recording was different. It was made a few days before Mother was hospitalized for the last time. It was a conversation between Father and Julian. They didn't know Mother had left the recorder running in the library. She's digging too much, Julian was saying. This foundation of hers, it could destroy everything we've built. The Aramax deal is on the verge of being signed. If the Aegis thing gets out, we're dead. I'll deal with her, Father said coldly. And her foundation. And as for Barbara, if she sticks her nose in here after, we have to be ready. I have leverage on her. Her file on Syria. The incident in Kandahar. A few anonymous calls to security, and her career will be in shambles. She'll be a nobody. Her word won't be worth a cent. I stopped the recording. My breath caught in my throat. The Kandahar incident. They were going to exploit that. It was a mission in which I refused to approve an airstrike on a building where I had intelligence that militants were hiding. My sources on the ground said civilians were holed up there. I took responsibility and called off the strike. A long trial followed. I was cleared, but my file was marked unconventional judgment in combat. They were going to twist that. They were going to paint me as an unstable, incompetent officer prone to vigilante justice. They were going to destroy my reputation, built on principles they despised. The rage gave way to icy calm. I knew their plan now. I knew their weapons, which meant I could prepare a defense. I copied all the files from my mother's key and the audio recordings to a secure drive. Tomorrow, I would hand it over to Cypher. He would find the digital trail of the anonymous call. He would track the movement of money from the fund. He would give Anya Sharma the ammunition she needed. And I would prepare my own strike. I knew the weak points of Thorn Dynamics. I knew the people inside who were tired of my father's tyranny and my brother's arrogance. The people who were loyal to my mother. It was time to activate the old network. I had been planning all night. This was no longer a family squabble over an inheritance. This was a full-fledged intelligence operation. The goal was to neutralize the enemy command. Any means necessary. No rules. Early in the morning, I left the apartment through the back door again. The observers were in place. Let them sit. Let them think they are in control. The most dangerous opponents are those you underestimate. And they have underestimated me all my life. And for this mistake, they will pay very dearly. Anya Sharma's office the next day resembled a military headquarters. On a large corkboard hung photographs of my father and brother, a diagram of their corporate structure, and red threads leading to offshore companies. Anya, coffee in one hand, highlighter in the other, looked like a general about to go to battle. I handed her the disc with my mother's tapes and documents. She listened to the key parts, and her face darkened even more. This isn't just a scam, Barbara. This is a conspiracy, she said, turning off the sound. They used a charity as a front for bribes. They paid lobbyists from Aegis to push defense contracts they wanted. This is several federal counts. Racketeering, corruption, grand larceny. She looked at me. Now I understand why they were so upset. You didn't get control of the money, you got control of their best evidence. What about the security clearance review? I asked. It's their shield and their sword. Anya replied. They use it to discredit you and stall for time. But we'll turn their shield into their Achilles heel. I'm filing a motion to immediately disclose the source of the anonymous information that was the basis for the review. I'll point to your impeccable record and the fact that this review began just after you inherited control of a fund that we know is guilty of financial irregularities. We'll present this as an attempt to harass a witness and obstruct justice. It was a bold move. We weren't defending ourselves. We were attacking. I like that. What if they refuse? They can. Anya nodded. It's a closed procedure. But the very fact of filing such a motion will create a stir. We'll make the security service think. They don't like being used in family squabbles, especially when it smells of big politics and dirty money. We will sow doubt. At that moment, a message from Cypher arrived on my burner phone. Audit completed. There are rats in the theater. Big ones. The trail leads up. Very up. Drop point active. I showed the message to Anya. She nodded. Go ahead. We need names. The drop point was in a storage locker at the old Union Station. I took out an ordinary-looking envelope. Inside was not a report, but a movie ticket for a film that had long since left theaters. On the back of the ticket, written in sympathetic ink, was a URL and a password. At home, on a clean laptop, I followed the link. Cypher's report was brief and deadly accurate. The anonymous tip against me had been initiated through a secure channel from the office of the Deputy Minister of Defense. The deputy was an old friend and protege of my father. Cypher had attached connection logs and metadata that irrefutably proved the source. But that wasn't all. He analyzed the financial flows of Aegis Strategy. It turned out that this lobbying firm transferred large sums to the personal accounts of not only politicians, but also one person inside the Pentagon's security service, the one who oversaw clearance checks. My father didn't just ask a friend for help. He bought an investigation into his own daughter. I sent the report to Anya. Her response was succinct. Jackpot. While Anya was preparing the legal bomb, I began my part of the operation. I compiled a list of former Thorne Dynamics employees who had left or been fired under strange circumstances. Mostly, they were people from finance and internal audit. People who were loyal to my mother, and who probably knew too much. First on the list was Evelyn Reed, the former head of internal audit. She had left a year ago for family reasons. I found her in a quiet Maryland suburb. She grew roses like my mother. I arrived unannounced. At first, she didn't want to talk. She had clearly been bullied into signing a non-disclosure agreement with draconian penalties. I didn't press her. I simply played her one of my mother's recordings. The one where she worries about the integrity of the foundation and mentions Evelyn as the only person she trusts in this snake pit. When the recording ended, Evelyn was crying. She knew, the woman whispered. She knew everything. And she told. She told how Julian had forced her to sign false reports, how she had been removed from the fund's audit, handed over to outside consultants from Aegis Strategy, how she had been threatened with ruining her husband's career if she did not keep quiet. She could not provide documents. They had been confiscated. But she was ready to testify. Her word, the word of a professional with an impeccable reputation, was worth its weight in gold. That evening, Anya called me. They responded to our petition. They refused. But, as I thought, they were nervous. My source in the department told me that your case had been transferred to special control. They will dig deeper. This means we have time while the bureaucratic machine grinds itself. She paused. But they're not sitting idly by either. Get ready. The media assault is coming soon. She was right. The next day, a story ran in one of the country's largest newspapers. The headline screamed, "War hero or unruly element. The troubled past of an officer claiming a multi-million-dollar inheritance." The article was full of innuendo and half-truths. Anonymous Pentagon sources expressed concern about my post-service mental state. And there it was. The Kandahar incident. Twisted, distorted, presented as evidence of my instability. They fired. That was their main caliber. And they missed, because they didn't know I had a witness to that day, and he was willing to talk. If you've ever felt like your past is being used against you, like your best actions are being twisted inside out to make you out to be a monster, you know the feeling. It's not just a lie. It's an attempt to steal your story. And there's no forgiveness for that. Subscribe if you agree. The Washington Chronicle article was a bombshell. Anya's phone was ringing off the hook. My name was everywhere, but not in the context I wanted. I was that heiress with the scandalous past. My father, General Thorne, was all over the news, commenting with a concerned, mournful air. "We're very concerned about Barbara. Service leaves scars. We just want to help her." It was disgusting. He was posing as a caring father while stabbing me in the back. Julian was even worse. He gave interviews to financial publications, talking about the need to protect the stability of Thorne Dynamics and the foundation from destructive and irrational actions. They were painting me as an unstable, damaged woman, incapable of making sound decisions. It was a classic tactic. If you can't disprove the facts, discredit the source. I turned off my phone and the internet. I needed to focus. Panic and anger were luxuries I couldn't afford. I knew this attack was predictable, which meant I had to have a counterattack ready. Anya arrived late that evening. She looked tired but determined. "They laid all their cards on the table," she said, pouring herself a whiskey. That's good. Now we know what to hit. They're lying about Kandahar, I said. And I know who can confirm it. Who? Anya asked. Colonel David Jennings. He was my commander in that operation. He was in the command center when I called off the strike. He supported my decision. He's retired now and runs a small security firm in Texas. Will he talk? Anya's voice was skeptical. Retired colonels don't like to be in the press, especially when it comes to their former bosses. It will, I said confidently. Jennings is a man of honor. He hates lies more than I do, and he couldn't stand my father. He considered him an armchair general. While I was contacting Jennings, Anya was working on another front. She was preparing a libel suit against the Washington Chronicle. We're not going to win this, she explained. The standard of proof for public figures is very high. But we don't need to win. We need to get access to their anonymous sources during the trial. We'll force them to either reveal who leaked this misinformation or admit that they published unverified rumors. Either way, their reputation will suffer, and we'll get what we need. Jennings answered my call on the second ring. His voice was as even and calm as I remembered. I summarized the situation. He listened without interrupting. I read that piece of crap, Barbara, he said when I finished. I was waiting for you to call. What do you want? Really, sir, I said. I need you to tell me how it really happened. Consider it done, he replied without hesitation. These staff rats have lied with impunity for too long. It's time to remind them what an officer's honor is. The next day, Anya organized a press conference. Not in her small office, but at the prestigious National Press Club. We wanted maximum impact. I sat next to Anya, and Colonel Jennings spoke via video link from his office in Austin. He wore a sharp suit, with the American flag and the flag of his old unit in the background. He spoke clearly, weighing every word. He talked about that night in Kandahar, about the intelligence that turned out to be wrong, about my decision to take responsibility and call off a strike that could have killed dozens of civilians, including children. He confirmed that the subsequent investigation had cleared me of all wrongdoing, calling my decision an example of measured leadership under stress. Lieutenant Thorne, he said, looking directly into the camera, saved not only innocent lives that day, but the honor of our unit. And those who today try to tarnish her name by using facts taken out of context are either liars or cowards. In the Army, we call such people unworthy of wearing the uniform. The effect was stunning. A statement from a serving officer would have been powerful, but a statement from a respected veteran with no commitments was a point-blank shot. Journalists who had written about me as a problematic heir the day before were now writing about a smear campaign against a war hero. Thorne Dynamics shares dropped several points. But that was just the beginning. While everyone was focused on the press conference, Cypher made his move. He finished his work and sent me the final report. Not only had he confirmed that the attack on me had been initiated from the office of the Deputy Secretary of Defense, he had found something else. He had hacked into the Aegis Strategy internal network. And there he found a secret project codenamed Legacy. It was a detailed plan for a hostile takeover of Thorne Dynamics after my father's death. A plan devised by my brother Julian in conjunction with Aegis Management. They were not just laundering money. They were going to steal the entire company from my father, using compromised politicians and officials as battering rams. Julian was playing his own game, a game far more dangerous than General Thorne had realized. And the charitable foundation I now controlled was the key to their scheme. It held the funds for the final blow. I stared at the diagram on the screen. Julian wasn't just betraying me. He was betraying my father, too. And that was the weapon I was going to use. I forwarded the report to Anya with a short note. Time to topple the board. Cypher's report changed everything. This was no longer just a story of family feud and corruption. It was a Shakespearean drama of betrayal within a clan, with a son sharpening a knife to plunge into his father's back. General Marcus Thorne, a master of manipulation and strategy, was himself a pawn in his own son's game. The irony was almost poetic. Anya immediately recognized the potential of this information. This is dynamite, she said over the secure line. But we can't just dump it on the press. They'll call it a forgery, corporate espionage. We need this information to get to the one person who will believe it without hesitation and for whom it will be a personal affront. Father, I guessed.
Exactly.
But not from us. It has to look like a leak. As if someone in Julian's circle has decided to betray him. We have to destroy their alliance from within. The plan was risky, but brilliant. Cypher prepared an anonymous data packet, a distillation of Project Legacy, the most incriminating slides from Julian's presentation, where he talked about the need to replace outdated leadership and streamline assets after the old guard left. It was all uploaded to an anonymous file-sharing service. Then Cypher, using his skills, sent a link to the packet from one of the work computers inside Aegis Strategy to my father's personal, supposedly secure email. It looked like a panicked leak from one of the conspirators. We had set the bait. Now we just had to wait for the predator to swallow it. While we waited for my father's reaction, Anya continued her legal offensive. Colonel Jennings's testimony and the public outcry had forced the Pentagon's security service to expedite its consideration of my case. They were called on the carpet before the Senate Armed Services Committee. No one likes their department being dragged through the press. Anya, using this moment, filed a second motion, attaching Evelyn Reed's testimony about the fund's financial fraud. Now we had not just a hint, but direct evidence linking my security clearance check to an attempt to cover up a crime. In the meantime, I was working on my own front. I met with 2 more former employees of Thorne Dynamics. One of them, a young programmer from the IT department, told me that, on Julian's orders, he had installed a backdoor on the corporate servers, a program that copied all the correspondence of the board of directors, including my father's personal letters, and sent it to an external server belonging to Aegis Strategy. He gave me evidence, code fragments, and access logs. He did it not out of revenge, but out of fear. He realized that he was being made an accomplice, and he wanted protection. My father's reaction to the leak was swift. It was private, but no less devastating. My source inside Thorne Dynamics, the programmer, told me that the day after the anonymous package was sent, General Thorne called an emergency board meeting to which Julian was not invited. After the meeting, the company's head of security, a longtime friend of Julian's, was fired. My father then froze all payments to Aegis Strategy, citing the need to conduct an internal audit. He began cutting Julian off from his tools of influence. He did not make a public scene. He acted like a surgeon, amputating a damaged limb to save the body. Julian obviously realized he had been found out. He panicked. He tried to see his father, but he was turned away. He called, but my father didn't pick up. And then my brother made a fatal mistake. He decided to act preemptively. Using his connections, he tried to move the frozen assets out of the charity through a complex scheme involving a small bank in the Bahamas. It was an act of desperation. And it was exactly what we were waiting for. As soon as the transaction was initiated, the alert system Cypher had installed on the charity's accounts went off. Anya immediately passed the information on to FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. It was no longer a suspicion, but irrefutable proof of an attempted theft. That evening, as I sat in Anya's office, her phone rang. It was Mr. Hensley, the old family lawyer. His voice was shaking. "Barbara," he said, "your father wants to see you. Right away. One-on-one." I looked at Anya. She nodded. "The game is over," she whispered. "He capitulates." I agreed to meet. He chose the place himself, the Lincoln Memorial. At night, when there were almost no people there. The place where he brought me as a child and told me about honor, duty, and legacy. How ironic. I knew this would not be a reconciliation. This would be a bargain. And I was ready. There was a tape recorder in my bag. The same one my mother left me. It was time to record the final chapter. The Lincoln Memorial was grand and deserted at night. The president's huge figure, carved from white marble, seemed to look down on the city below with silent reproach. The air was cool and damp. I had arrived 15 minutes early, taking up a position from which I could clearly see all the approaches. An old habit. My father appeared exactly at the appointed time. He was alone, not in his general's uniform, but in a severe dark coat. Without his usual entourage, he seemed smaller, older. The wrinkles on his face were deeper. He came and stood next to me, looking at the reflection of the Washington Monument in the mirror-like surface of the pond. We were silent for several minutes. The silence was broken only by the distant hum of the city. "I know everything," he said finally, without turning his head. His voice was low, lacking the usual edge of authority. "About Julian, about Aegis, about his plan." I remained silent. I was not going to make this easy for him. "He betrayed me," my father continued. "He betrayed everything I built. He learned from the best," I said quietly. He turned sharply, the old fury briefly flaring in his eyes. "Don't you dare equate me with him. Everything I did for this family, for our name. You lied, you stole, and you used money meant for wounded soldiers to buy contracts," I retorted, looking him straight in the eye. "You tried to destroy my career and my reputation to cover up your crimes. You call that for the family? It was only for you.
For your ego.
For your legacy built on lies." He recoiled as if he had struck him. For the first time in my life, I saw him truly confused. He was used to being obeyed or feared. He was not used to the truth being told to his face. "What do you want, Barbara?" he asked, changing tactics. He was no longer a father, but a negotiator. "Fairness," I replied. "But I'm afraid you don't know that word." "Money," he ignored me. "You want the company? It's yours. I'll get rid of Julian. We'll say he left for health reasons. You'll join the board. We'll sweep this thing under the rug. No one will get hurt." His offer was so cynical that I barely suppressed a bitter smile. He still thought everything could be bought or hidden. "No one will get hurt?" I asked. "What about the veterans who didn't get help because their money went to bribes? What about my life, which you tried to ruin? What about my mother's memory, whose will you trampled on?" "Enough with the pathos," he barked. "I'm offering you real power. The future. You can lead an empire. Isn't that what you wanted? To prove that you were better than Julian?" "I never wanted to be better than Julian," I said calmly. "I just wanted to be myself. And you two couldn't stand that. I don't want your empire. It's rotten to the core. I want my mother's foundation to serve those it was created for. And I want you and your son to answer for what you've done. Legally." His face hardened. He knew there was no bargaining, that I would not back down. "You will destroy this family," he hissed. "You will destroy the Thorn name." "You destroyed it," I said. I merely turned on the light so that everyone could see the dirt. I turned to leave. "Barbara, wait," he called after me. There was desperation in his voice. "I can fix this. I will testify against Julian. I will take the blame. But leave the company alone. It is my life's work." He was willing to turn in his own son to save his creation. In that moment, I knew he was incorrigible. His legacy was more important to him than anything else, more important than honor, more important than family, more important than even his own son. I didn't answer. I simply walked away, leaving him alone in the shadow of the great president who had once fought to hold a nation together. And my father had never even been able to keep his own family together. Back in the car, I turned off the recorder. It was all there. His confession. His offer of a bribe. His willingness to betray his son. It was the final nail in their coffin. I sent the file to Anya with one word. Finale. The next day, FBI agents arrested Julian in his luxury penthouse. The warrant was based on an attempt to illegally transfer funds from the foundation's accounts. A few hours later, Thorn Dynamics issued an official statement announcing that General Marcus Thorn was resigning from all positions and would cooperate fully with the investigation into financial irregularities at the foundation. The war was over. But I didn't feel triumphant. Just empty and tired. And a quiet, faint hope that now, out of these ruins, something real could be built. Julian's arrest and his father's resignation sent shockwaves through Washington's business and political circles. The story was front-page news. Journalists who had recently been throwing mud at me were now vying with each other to interview Anya, calling her an unyielding fighter against corruption. My name was mentioned too, but in a different vein, as the name of the person who had lanced this abscess. The internal investigation into me was quietly wound up. I received an official apology for the inconvenience caused. My security clearance was restored. The system that had been trying to swallow me up yesterday was now bowing and scraping and trying to make amends. I did not accept their apologies. I simply took note. The interim board of Thorn Dynamics offered me my father's job. They saw me as a savior, someone with a clean slate who could restore investor confidence. I refused. This company is my father's legacy, I told them, and I want nothing to do with his legacy. My goal wasn't to take his throne. My goal was to carry out my mother's will. I focused all my efforts on the foundation. The first thing I did was change its name entirely. It was no longer the Thorn Foundation. It was now the Cassandra Project, in honor of my mother's rose and the prophet no one believed. I fired the entire old management team, all the managers loyal to my father and brother. In their place, I hired a team of veterans, former military lawyers, and social workers. People who knew the problems firsthand. We completely changed the Foundation's mission. Instead of big patriotic events and sponsoring banquets, we directed all funds to 3 specific programs. The first, second line, was a legal aid program for veterans who had been unfairly fired, denied benefits, or had run-ins with the law. It was headed by Anya Sharma, who became the Foundation's chief legal counsel. The second program, Fulcrum, provided temporary housing and employment assistance for veterans who had found themselves on the street. We bought a small hotel and converted it into comfortable apartments. The third program, which I personally ran, was called Safe Haven. It was designed for female veterans who had suffered from sexual violence in the military. We created a safe space where they could receive psychological help, undergo rehabilitation, and learn to trust the world again. It was hard, grueling work. Every day I was confronted with other people's pain, with stories that chilled my blood. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. I wasn't just signing checks. I was seeing lives change. I was seeing a woman who was afraid to leave her room smile for the first time. I was seeing a man who had lost his leg and his faith in himself learn a new profession and start his own small business. It was something worth fighting for. One day, Mr. Hensley called me. He said the trial of my father and brother was coming to an end. Given my father's full cooperation with the investigation and his testimony against his son and Aegis strategy, he was facing probation and a huge fine. Julian, as the mastermind of the scheme, was facing 10 to 15 years in federal prison. Your father asked me to tell you that he wants to see you, the lawyer added. I refused. Our conversation at the Lincoln Memorial was our last. I had nothing more to say to him. He made his choice, I made mine. Our paths diverged forever. Within a few months, Project Cassandra was in full swing. We had helped dozens of people. We were becoming a household word in the veterans community, not as a big foundation with a general's name on it, but as a place to come when you had nowhere else to go. One evening, while sorting through my mail in my small, modest office, I came across a yellowed envelope with no return address. Inside was an old photograph. It was of me, a little girl of about 7, sitting on my mother's lap in their garden. We were both laughing, and my mother was adjusting the dandelion crown on my head. On the back, in her familiar handwriting, were just 2 words: I knew. I pinned that photograph to the wall in front of my desk. It meant more to me than any award or title. It was a reminder of why I was here. I hadn't saved the world. I hadn't changed the system. But I had built a small island of hope on the ruins of a lie. And that was my true legacy. The legacy is not of General Thorn, but of his wife, who loved roses and believed in justice. And that was more than enough. If you've made it this far, you probably also believe that revenge isn't just about destruction. Sometimes the best revenge is to build something so good that it eclipses all the darkness that came before. Subscribe for more stories about how something beautiful is born from the ashes. The months passed. The Thorn family's courtroom drama gradually faded from the front pages, giving way to new scandals. Julian was sentenced to 12 years in prison. My father was given 5 years probation and the confiscation of most of his fortune. Thorn Dynamics, stripped of its shady schemes and patrons, began losing contracts and was eventually acquired by a larger competitor. The empire my father had spent his entire life building was crumbling to dust. I didn't watch it with glee. I tried not to think about it at all. My life was here now, within the walls of the Cassandra Project. Our foundation was growing. We opened branches in 2 more cities. Anya won several high-profile cases, restoring the rights of veterans whom the system had tried to write off. The New York Times wrote a big article about us, not in the scandal section, but in the people who changed the world section. One day, my assistant, a former Marine sergeant named Maria, walked into my office. "Barbara, you have a visitor," she said. "He didn't sign up. He says it's personal." I tensed. I didn't like unexpected visitors. "Who is it?" He introduced himself as Colonel David Jennings. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't seen or spoken to Jennings since the press conference. He walked into the office, still looking smart, wearing a plain but well-fitting suit. We shook hands firmly. "Just happened to be passing through," he said, glancing around my modest office with a photograph of my mother on the wall. "You've got yourself a nice place here, Thorne. Call me Barbara, sir. I'm not Thorne anymore." He grinned. "Okay, Barbara. I've got something here." He handed me a thin folder. "What's this?" I asked. "My resignation," he said. "I'm leaving the security business. It's boring. I want to do something real. I heard you have a program called Second Line. I think my experience can be useful. I'm not a lawyer like Sharma, but I know how to talk to colonels and generals in their language. Sometimes it's more effective than a lawsuit." I was stunned. Colonel Jennings, one of the most respected combat officers of his generation, wanted to work for me. "I would be honored, sir," was all I could say. "I would be honored," he replied seriously. "What you do here is real service to our country. Much more important than building missiles." His arrival marked a new stage for the Foundation. With his authority and connections, we were able to reach out to rooms in the Pentagon that had previously been closed to us. We began not just to solve veterans' problems, but to change the system that created them. One night, walking home late, I saw a familiar figure at my front door. It was my father. He looked terrible. Thin, haggard, wearing a worn coat that was too big for him. He didn't look like a formidable general. He looked like a broken old man. "Barbara," he said, and his voice was quiet and hoarse. I stopped but didn't come closer. I just wanted to say," he hesitated, choosing his words. "Your mother, she would have been proud." He handed me an envelope. "This is all that's left. Give it to your foundation. I don't need it anymore." He turned and walked away, hunched over, without looking back. I opened the envelope. Inside was a check for tens of thousands of dollars and a note written in an unsteady, old man's hand. "Forgive me." I stood under the street lamp, looking at those 2 words. I felt no forgiveness, no compassion, only a cold, bitter void. It was too late. The wounds he had inflicted could not be healed with money or a belated apology. I tore up the check and threw it in the nearest trash can. I did not want his dirty money in my mother's fund. The next day, I created a new scholarship within the Cassandra Project. A scholarship in my mother's name, Eleanor Thorne, for the children of veterans who wanted an education but could not afford it. That was my answer. Not revenge, not forgiveness, but creation. I was building a future on the foundation he had tried to destroy. And that future was bright. Another 2 years passed. The Cassandra Project had become a national organization. We were not just a charity, but a force to be reckoned with. Colonel Jennings, or simply David, as he asked to be called, proved an invaluable ally. His integrity and impeccable reputation opened doors that had been closed to Anya and her lawsuits. We worked in tandem. He negotiated, she struck when negotiations reached an impasse. I was the strategist setting goals and making sure we stayed on course and didn't become another bureaucratic machine. My life settled into a calm, measured course. Work, occasional meetings with friends, quiet evenings with a book. I learned to sleep without nightmares. The ghosts of the past almost ceased to bother me. One day, I got a letter in the mail from a federal prison in Pennsylvania. From Julian. I wanted to delete it without reading it, but something stopped me. The letter was short, handwritten on a piece of paper from a legal pad. "Barbara, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I'm writing for a different reason. People have been coming to see me, not lawyers. They've been asking questions about you, about the foundation. They work for Aramax. Aramax. The same defense corporation my brother so wanted to get a contract with. They think you're standing in their way, that your foundation is preventing them from pushing through a new arms procurement bill. They're angry. Be careful. I know how they work. They'll stop at nothing. Consider this the only honorable thing I've ever done. I reread the letter several times. A chill ran down my spine. I thought the war was over, but it seemed I'd just won one battle, and the real war was just beginning. Aramax was a hydra, a monster with billions in turnover and lobbyists in every cabinet of power. Compared to them, Thorne Dynamics was a child sandbox. And now this hydra turned its gaze on me. I immediately called an emergency meeting. Me, Anya, and David. I showed them the letter. David frowned. I've heard about this bill. It would allow them to sell experimental weapons to the Pentagon without fully testing them. That's billions of dollars. And yes, we strongly opposed it. We argued that it puts soldiers' lives at risk. They tried to buy us, Anya added. They offered a large donation to the fund if we softened our position. We refused, of course. And now they've moved on to Plan B, I concluded. They'll try to destroy us, discredit us, intimidate us. Let them try, David chuckled. They think we're just a bunch of do-gooders. They don't know who they're dealing with. We need to be proactive, Anya said. We need dirt on Aramax. Something that will make them go away and forget about our existence. At that moment, I knew I needed Cypher again. I contacted him. Big fish, he said after listening to me. Very big. This is going to be dangerous, but interesting. A week later, he sent me his first report. He had found a vulnerability in Aramax's internal network. And what he found was far worse than financial fraud. Aramax had been secretly testing its new weapons not on the range, but in real combat in a third-world country. They were using Allied soldiers as guinea pigs, without telling them they were using experimental systems. The reports listed these operations as successful field tests. But Cypher had also found internal documents, reports of glitches, system failures, and unforeseen losses. They weren't just lying to their own government. They were lying to the entire world. And the cost of those lies was human lives. I had in my hands a bomb capable of destroying not just one company, but the entire top brass of the defense industry. But releasing the data could have sparked an international scandal and put the lives of many people, including Cypher, at risk. I faced a choice similar to the one in Kandahar. Strike and destroy the enemy, risking collateral damage. Or find another way. I chose the other way. I didn't leak the information to the press. I sent a single, anonymous email to the CEO of Aramax. It said one thing. We know about Project Chimera. And attached was a single file, a photograph from an internal report of the failed test site. It wasn't a declaration of war. It was an ultimatum. 2 days later, the procurement bill was withdrawn from Congress. Aramax issued a statement citing additional consultation. They understood. They backed down. That night, I sat in my office and looked at a picture of my mother. She smiled at me, and I thought I heard her say, "You did the right thing, Bobby." I won. Again. But this time, I wasn't just defending myself. I was defending what we'd built. And I knew there would be many more battles like this. But I wasn't alone now. I had a team. I had a purpose. And I was ready. After the Aramax incident, there was a period of relative calm. They no longer interfered in our lives, and we could calmly do our work. The Cassandra Project became a benchmark in the field of helping veterans. People came from all over the country to learn from our experience. David Jennings became the public face of the fund. His appearances in Congress and on television carried enormous weight. Anya Sharma turned our legal department into a real justice machine, winning one hopeless case after another. And I remained in the shadows. I liked the role of strategist, the Grey Cardinal. I was the foundation on which the whole building rested. One day, I received an official letter from the White House. I was being invited to an awards ceremony in the Rose Garden. The president was going to present me with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian award in the United States for outstanding service to American veterans. My first reaction was to decline. I didn't like publicity. I didn't think I deserved awards for simply doing my job. But David and Anya convinced me otherwise. "This isn't for you, Barbara," David said. "This is for them. For all the people we've helped. It's recognition of their struggle. And it's a signal to all the Aramaxes of the world that we are protected, that we can't just be erased." I agreed. On the appointed day, I stood in the Rose Garden among senators, generals, and other recipients of the award. I was wearing a simple, formal navy blue dress. No jewelry except for a small rose brooch, the same one I'd found in my mother's things. When my name was announced, I walked up to the president. He placed a ribbon with a heavy gold medal around my neck and, shaking my hand, quietly said, "Your mother would be proud of you, Miss Thorne." I just nodded, unable to utter a word. After the ceremony, Mr. Hensley came up to me. His hair was gray, but he was still elegant. "Congratulations, Barbara," he said. "I always knew you had some of your mother's spirit." He handed me a small package. "Your father asked me to give you this. He died last week. Heart attack." I felt nothing. No grief, no joy, no relief. Just emptiness. The man who was my father had died to me long ago, that night at the Lincoln Memorial. I opened the package later, in the quiet of my office. Inside was an old, faded copy of Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls, his favorite book. Between the pages, I found a photograph. It was of a young Lieutenant, Marcus Thorne, fresh out of West Point. He was standing next to a young, beautiful woman, my mother. They were both smiling, and there was hope in their eyes. On the back, in my father's handwriting, was written, "The Beginning." And below, in a different, unsteady handwriting, one word was added, "Sorry." I looked at that photograph for a long time. At those two young people, full of dreams, not yet knowing what their lives would become. I thought about how there are no absolutely good or absolutely bad people. There are choices we make. My father made his, and it led him to loneliness and an inglorious end. I made mine, and it led me here, to this office, doing what I love, surrounded by people I respect. I didn't forgive him. Some things can't be forgiven. But maybe at that moment I began to understand him. I put the photograph in my desk drawer. It was the past. And I preferred to live in the present and look to the future. That evening, we had a small celebration at the foundation. We were celebrating the 5th anniversary of Project Cassandra. There were a lot of people there, our staff, volunteers, veterans we had helped with their families. The room was buzzing with voices and laughter. I stood to the side, watching the scene, and felt not triumph, but a quiet, deep satisfaction. A young woman we had helped out of a severe depression after serving in Iraq came up to me. She was now a university student and one of our best volunteers. "Thank you, Miss Barbara," she said. "You saved my life." "You saved yourself," I replied. "We simply gave you a foothold." She smiled. And that smile meant more than all the medals and awards in the world. I realized that this was my victory. Not my father's empire destroyed. Not my enemies defeated. But that smile, that life saved, this hope that was born from the ashes. And I knew that the journey was not over. But I was no longer afraid. I was home. If this story resonates with you, if you believe that even after the darkest night there is a dawn, and that true strength lies not in destroying but in building, then stay with us. There are many more stories of real battles and real victories ahead.